Like I wore men's clothes, I dated women, I have a beard. What? I look manly enough to pass as man.
And I'm going to add the non-binary folks out there too.
Autism and ADHD is a Venn diagram of traits.
AuDHD could not even be a diagnosis until 2013.
Another episode of Neurodivergent Connections. I'm Scott Simpson. I'm autistic and ADHD. AuDHD, some people say. And that's a diagnosis that's coming up in discussion more and more. What is it and how might it differ between men and women? Joining me to unravel this mystery is Mona Kay. Mona, tell us about yourself.
Hi, Scott and Greg. I'm Mona Kay. I'm a social worker and I'm the host of the Neurodiverse Love podcast. And I am so glad to be here with you guys today.
All right. And from, is it Idaho or Ohio? I'm Canadian. I get them mixed up. Is Greg Fuqua. Greg, tell us about yourself.
I'm Greg Fuqua. I'm a late identified autistic mental health counselor in the state of Iowa. One of those I states.
Jeez, I wasn't even, I had two and I got them both wrong.
You didn't get it in your list yet.
You get the pass there. But yeah, I work with neurodivergent couples, individuals as a counselor, consultant, and coach. And as always, excited to be here.
So we can start with an issue that was brought to Mona's attention. Mona, you got an email from someone.
Yeah, I got an email from somebody who shared that they had heard some of the episodes that I did with AuDHD women. And she is married to a man who he believes or she believes is AuDHD. And she was wondering how it might present differently, AuDHD, for men versus women. And I'm going to add the non-binary folks out there too. And we know that AuDHD could not even be a diagnosis until 2013. So you either were autistic or you were ADHD, and you could have co-occurring issues like OCD or dyslexia or whatever. But AuDHD became its own diagnosis in 2013. That's only 12 years. So there's lots of folks out there that I know are struggling to understand themselves, and lots of folks who are with partners who are AuDHD and struggling to understand them. And so, Scott, you're the AuDHDer among us, right? So what do you think? And you happen to be a man.
Yeah, well, technically, and depends on whose technicalities we're looking at. Because for the first time, I always assumed, men are men, women are women, because I was the environment I was raised in. And within myself, I did not feel any great urge to explore or challenge that. Like I wore men's clothes, I dated women, I have a beard. What? I look manly enough to pass as man, but being man and performing masculinity has never been really my gimmick. I like it only until recently when I was like, don't be ashamed of your body hair. You're a big burly bear. But if I want to wear pink too, I can do that. So autism blew up my notions of what men and women are, what gender is. And frankly, over the past few years, learning so much about autism and ADHD, I have a weird relationship with understanding those two. If I take away the imposed structure created in the DSM and books like it, they're imposing definitions and order on something that is truly just a bunch of symptoms. Like they are saying as though there is this thing that exists, we totally mean it, called ADHD, and it is something in you, or it's a way that you're built differently. Same with autism. It's a thing that, and it is what we say it is. And we're not you, but we can tell you're this way because we made a list. We made a list of things that make your specific kind of weird stand out in a way that's different than every other kind of weird that we've ever written down. And you can only have one. They changed it. You can have more than one. In fact, they'll say that you can have a whole bunch now. You can have one which also includes this with this accessory kit. It all feels, the more I understand it, the more it feels very artificial. And I thought I understood a lot about myself based on what I saw in descriptions and accounts of people with ADHD because I wasn't looking at the other stuff. And a lot of the discussion around ADHD includes, it often comes with sensory sensitivities. It'll often come with audio processing disorder. It will often come with emotional dysregulation. And by the time I built enough understanding of it all in my mind, I can't tell them apart because everything that I see in what gets defined as ADHD, I have an explanation for in my understanding of autism. Autism often comes with notable executive function challenges. And to me, that's what ADHD is. It's executive function challenges, inhibition, planning, sequencing, all that stuff that is so important. ADHD is like a spin-off to me of autism. Because they were defined as separate things, all the research around ADHD went this way, and all the research about autism went this way. And they each had their own theories of what was causing them. And they went so far apart, and now it's like they got far apart and they're looking at each other, and it's like we're brothers or we're twins or something. I see them as different presentations of probably the same underlying biomechanical things that are making us this way. Greg, you see a lot of these kind of people.
Yeah, I think you make a really potent and important point about this. And this can be all over the map. So number one is that ADHD, autism and ADHD is a Venn diagram of traits. Okay. So, Scott, if you end up doing production stuff here, all right, ADHD.
Hey, look at those graphics.
Autism, two circles, and they overlap, and they almost always overlap. The science says, an autistic person is more likely to have executive functioning stuff too, and so there's some big overlap. Now they say maybe 50% of autistics will have some ADHD traits. 40% of ADHDers will have some autistic traits, something like that. But I think it's pretty mushy, and I think there is a lot of overlap. So that's the first thing. So what I often say, and I don't agree with everything you're saying, but I'm interested in your theory coming up. I've often thought about the same thing that you have, which is ADHD just a form of autism? Or is autism a form of ADHD, and then the combination is an amplification of that neurodivergent presentation. But I think there tends to be overlap all the time. And I would say mostly there is. And then but there tends to be a dominant, what I call presentation. That presentation changes on the circumstance, on the situation, on the gender, and on the adaptive traits connected to ADHD or autism. And that creates that dominant presentation. And sometimes it does look different circumstantially. Okay. So number one, that's what I want to say about kind of that piece of it, which is it is hard to extract and piece together and box people in with this stuff. It's almost impossible. It's very tricky, in fact. I also, along with issues of gender and identity, will see these stereotypes in terms of how we may describe this today flipped or contrary to what we're saying. So for instance, I have a couple, one of them's ADHD, one of them's autistic. Now the woman's autistic and presents more stereotypic like an Asperger's guy. And the guy presents more like an ADHD dysregulated emotional woman, And so that's how much it can be all over the map. And autistics neurodivergents have big issues around identity. Who am I? And we tend to be pretty independent about how we think about who we are, meaning we're just who we are, So all those things lead us to we need to think about how this stuff isn't going to be fit in a box, and how some of the things we may say may appear to be stereotypes. And I think the biggest issue we'll see as we ferret this stuff out today is that it's the social conditioning and masking with women that create a lot of the different presentations we see. Now, the last thing I'm going to say before we shift over to you, Mona, is that women are less likely to be diagnosed with either. Okay? And so this is a for sure thing. And that's partly because of masking, but also because I think women, particularly with ADHD, it's more acceptable for them to be bubbly, extroverted, a little ditzy or flighty, which can be ADHD-like traits, but also they're attached to feminine presentations socially, right? So it's sort of normalized. Autism is less likely also to be diagnosed on both sides, but particularly women, because a lot of our biases around the way we understand autism are through a masculine and male presentation and lens. And if you are diagnosed with both, you're almost always likely to get an ADHD diagnosis first. Again, it's more acceptable, more seen, less stigma. It seems like it's kind of been more normalized for longer. And it also feels like it's less severe. It's easier to go there. But a lot of times, like you brought up too, Scott, it's neither, it's both. It's just the bias and the lens with which we're looking at things. And again, there's a lot of circumstance and other things that go into it for sure.
It could go both ways, where the ADHD being very creative and not tied to a structure and all that stuff may feel better. So I guess for me, the question that folks might want to ask themselves is whether you're presenting more with autism or presenting more with ADHD or a nice combo of both. Are you functioning as your authentic self, right? Because I do wonder if, and this is just Mona's thinking out loud, I do wonder if more men are comfortable with one over the other and more women are comfortable with one over the other, and non-binary folks. I don't know. And are they more comfortable presenting one in the workplace, one in their romantic relationships or family environment, or in other areas? And so here are, I think, some of the challenges that couples or individuals might want to think about, and it might help them as they move forward. And these are like my 4 or 5 top areas. How could the AuDHD be affecting your communication with your partner and others? How is or could the AuDHD be affecting your emotions and your emotional reciprocity, right? How could it be affecting your socializing? And how could it be affecting your sensory, either overload or underwhelmedness? And how are those affecting your life? Because I think when you begin to understand, and there are a lot of other areas, we can talk about executive functioning and all of that, but those 4 seem to be big for me and the people that I have had an opportunity to work with. And when you look at the patterns that each might be creating in your life, in your relationship, and those patterns work for you, okay, but they don't work for your partner, that's where I think the challenge can come, because the partner might be trying to figure out, well, which is the autism and which is the ADHD and which do we have to work on and all of that stuff. And I don't have an answer for any of this, but I think it's something that we need to talk about more and more. And Sarah Hendricks, who's been on my podcast and she's been a presenter at the 2025 Neurodiverse Love Conference, she's actually writing a book on AuDHD adults. And I don't know that anybody else has written one, and you guys may know. And she's interviewing and surveying, I don't know, possibly hundreds of AuDHDers all over the world. We need more work on this, but we also need to understand that, like Greg said, and I think, Scott, you may have alluded to too, you're trying to find your identity. And there could be a major clash in your identity between the ADHD and the autism. So you're on this identity path to figure out what feels most authentic and comfortable for you. Meanwhile, your partner's watching you and possibly going a little crazy trying to figure out what the heck's going on.
Thank you for reminding me about Sarah Hendricks. I have not consumed any of her work, but she comes up every time I go looking for
yeah.
recommendations on the absolute best of the best. So she's going to be my next Audible credit. I'm going to go after this and look something up because I was re-listening to Autism and Heels by
Jennifer Cook, yeah.
yeah. It's excellent. It's one of my top most recommended ones. And I found myself in listening to it and Fran Brady's book. And I went on a listening binge, a whole bunch of books by autistic and AuDHD women. I frankly identified more with them than I did some of the books by men. Although the men's books reflected a lot, but maybe they didn't reveal the same things about themselves that the female authors did. But I found I identified with just as much in the women's books as I did in the men's books. To your point on identity, I worry what becomes of us if we are looking to the psychiatrists for our identity. Because all that these two categories are, if we're trying to decide, are we this, is this our identity? These are just categories written up by committees for paperwork and treatment and, whatever they think they're going to do with them. They're not for us. They're for the system. They're a product of the system for the system to diagnose us as having a pathology. So I would caution anybody about getting into that. It feels kind of like asking the plantation owner who you are when you're a slave. Tell me who I am and I'll be that thing. No, I'm not comfortable with that, which is why I circle around to gender and sex and autism. We talk about maleness and femaleness and is there a male autism and a female autism or even an AuDHD for each sex. I've stumbled upon a word that just instantly made sense to me, and the word is autigender. And it made sense in the sense of it being a paradigm shift. Because just like we don't have to pick our identity from a selection of identities provided by psychiatrists, maybe autistic people don't have to pick between male and female as presented by neurotypical society. Maybe we come into this world with a different understanding of our bodies and our place in the social structure. And maybe male and female aren't the two things that we are made to choose from. And that being told by society to be one of those two things, if we're not really feeling it, that's going to feel gross. And gosh, a lot of people say they've been feeling that and have been looking for a way to feel better. And I don't know if the way to feel better is to pick one from the choices given to you by the people who are telling you how to be.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with that. Absolutely. So many of my clients struggle with issues of identity. Who am I? Now, there are two sources for everything. There's hardware and there's software. Hardware is what we're born into the world with. Software is what we experience, and how those interface are part of this. That's how I sift through it a little bit. But I have so many people that are just like, I don't know who I am, right? And particularly the AuDHDers, right? But this is a neurodivergent thing in general. And what I say to them is I say, identity is bullshit. And identity is a neurotypical social structure. It does not work for us. Who we are is complex, it's layered, it varies. And if you're neurodivergent, it's even more so, and we demand a sense of our freedom in the world. We need to free ourselves as maybe social conditioned slaves from these things that have been put on us about who we're supposed to be, that there's supposed to be this consistent and stable sense of who you are. Get out of that, please, right away, okay? Because if that's where you're living out of, you are going to be in internal conflict. I guarantee it. As a neurodivergent, especially as an AuDHD, especially so. And so part of what you said about identity, I think is really important for us to understand. I think it's a neurotypical social construct. I don't think there is such a thing as identity. Who we are changes with every experience we have. Okay. And do we have our own creative freedom to define who we are? Please. We need this so badly. This is what mental health is all about. And so a lot of people say, what is this about? And I say, mental health work is about reclaiming yourself. It's taking off all the crap, all the baggage that have been put on us, and about refinding ourselves in an authentic way that can be flexible, that can be creative, that can be open, that can be diverse, that can be unique, very unique. Please, let us be that, right? So I think that point is such a huge one for me. To reference a little bit about, again, what I'm going to touch on what I think the differences are in ADHD and autism and what I see in terms of some of the strengths and issues that go along with it. So my AuDHDers tend to have it more difficult, it seems like. And I think it's because there is more internal conflict and more a misunderstanding of themselves and a resistance to who they are. And it could be going back to identity issues too. But, as you referenced, Mona, with autistics tend to be more internally regulated. So we isolate, we go inside, we find ways to connect with ourselves, with our special interests. We tend to be detail oriented. We tend to like more structure. We tend to shut down instead of melt down. And that's not always true, but these are just broad strokes here. And so ADHDers tend to be more co-regulative. They tend to be more externalized. They tend to a lot of times also need more social interaction and need to tether off other people's energy. They also, I think, tend to be more spontaneous. They tend to be more free flow. And they tend to be more process-oriented. Autistics tend to be more outcome-oriented. We need to know why. We need to know the details. We need all that control around that. Now, an AuDHDer has all those traits, right? So how do you manage that when you have these contrasting traits where I might be like, I really need to complete this job, and there are parts of you like, no, we don't. We need to actually jump over here. No, let's just let this be, No, we need to figure out what's the next plan in this project. And then part of you is like, no, stop it. Just let me do it, And so literally I see that in my AuDHD clients all the time. And often what I tell them is when you get these traits and parts, and so a lot of what I do with my clients who are AuDHDers are to identify which parts show up when, also which parts have more ADHD and more autism. And I work with DID, and I see this all the time. I may see an alter in session that is 5 times ADHD than another one, or more autistic than another one. And so these sort of also gravitate in different parts of ourselves for different reasons. And so, but once we get a symphony going in us, and we understand, we can draw from all of these things, that these are all part of us, and that sometimes I need to be this way, and sometimes I can be that way, and sometimes I can draw from these strengths and draw from those. Let me tell you, AuDHDers are absolute powerhouses of people. The potential that they have in the world is mind-blowing. And when they get things going, they're some of the most creative and innovative and actually high-functioning people. Another easy example is stimulation. A lot of times an ADHDer needs change, likes transitions, likes variety, needs new things, novelty, and if you're autistic too, you may get overwhelmed very quickly. You may get overstimulated very quickly, seeking those things out. And so you can see that there can be a constant battle that's always going on about what's wrong with me. And partners of AuDHDers go through this in spades too. Who the heck are you now? Well, that's not consistent, and again, here's social conditioning, neurotypical identity, social conditioning. You're not consistent. Okay. You said this before, now you're doing it this way. And they don't have an argument. They're like, you're right. I do where my energy leads and what it looks like depending on the circumstance, depending on my energy, depending on my stress, depending on a bunch of things. So I want to make sure we sort of touch on there are what seems like some contrasting and polarities that go on here that are advantages, are incredible strengths, and also create a lot of internal conflict, particularly as they do with consistency and identity issues.
Yeah, I think that was so, so good, Greg. And I'm going to go back to the 4 areas that I mentioned earlier and just maybe even give some examples. And I'd love both of your thoughts on these because I think this is where couples are most challenged when there isn't consistency, right? Like if you have a routine and you eat the same things, for most of your meals and you have your uniform and you go to work and, when you stop doing those things or you decide you want to go down a different career path because you've been a lawyer and you want to become, I don't know, an artist, perhaps, Greg. It's like, what happened? And then maybe you discover that you're AuDHD and some of this begins to make sense. So like the socializing piece I hear often is a big challenge because the autistic brain wants to maybe only focus on, being with their special interest, their people, their tribe. They want to info dump. They want to talk about only what they want to talk about. And then the ADHD person wants that excitement, the new challenges, new people, new tribe, makes all these, appointments, has all these things on the calendar. And then when they come up, they may be like, oh my gosh, what the heck did I do? And some of that may involve their partner. They said yes to a trip. They said yes to a family event and all this stuff. And the partner who may not understand that this person that they're with and they love is AuDHD is trying to balance all that. So the socializing piece can become a real challenge, right, in a relationship. I think the emotional reciprocity piece and the emotional piece or the emotional differences where you talked about, the shutdowns, there could be meltdowns, there could be a lot of crying, there could be a lot of speaking loudly, moving, even throwing things, whatever, to release that energy, but then be gone for days, in bed, away, not wanting to talk. And you're like, what the heck, and I sometimes hear the term Jekyll and Hyde. Who am I with? It's like I have a partner who's a Jekyll and Hyde, and there's not this consistency that I'm looking for, maybe that I had at the beginning of the relationship because they were masking. And I don't know that there's certain things that go with, your male or female or non-binary identity. I'm just putting these things out for folks to think about. I think the communication piece, again, depending on your energy, I think there's something that I keep talking about, which is nervous system regulation. I think so many of us don't know that we've been living in an extremely dysregulated nervous system or with a dysregulated nervous system probably our entire lives if we are neurodivergent and even if we're not neurodivergent. Because we have so much coming at us and with social media and everything that we can get in a second or a millisecond, it really doesn't give us time to unwind and relax. And we need that period as human beings. And I think the ADHD side may be looking for that constant, communication. I want to process, I want to talk, and then they get worn out. And again, they're not available for days, hours, weeks, and it just feels really, really uncomfortable. These could be the realities of being with an AuDHD person that maybe you only thought was ADHD or only autistic. Right. So, and I think we're going to have more and more adults and more children diagnosed AuDHD as we, begin to understand more and more what this looks like. But the fact of the matter is, if you are constantly dysregulated, if your nervous system is constantly dysregulated, or your partner is picking up on that because maybe you have alexithymia or challenges with interoception, how do you create a toolbox that you can turn to? And I don't mean an actual, toolbox. I mean different resources that you can access so that you can regulate your nervous system as you're figuring out which pieces of your neurology kind of fit for the different things that you want to do and achieve in your life and the partner you want to be in your romantic relationship. This is not something that you achieve understanding of overnight. It just isn't, right? So it's a process, and it might be a lifetime process.
Yep.
So I'm going to say to partners of folks who are thinking they're AuDHD or have been diagnosed AuDHD, have that conversation about, I'm curious regarding what's happening right now. I want to understand how to support you. I want to understand what you need at this time in this moment and how we can be the best partners possible, because it's going to be, I think, a major roller coaster.
Yes.
Yeah. And could lead to the end of the relationship if you're not curious and, I think, compassionate, because your partner's figuring it out and you're trying to figure it out at the same time.
I'm realizing that whether you're autistic, ADHD, AuDHD, the great thing about them being Venn diagram me and the sense that they are, in the same family, maybe, is that the solutions that work for one tend to work for the other. So it's almost like we could take all the symptoms of both of them, plus maybe some other stuff that just isn't codified in the DSM, but we know is part of what's going on, and put them on Scrabble tiles. Put them and like we're selecting. Mona, you've played Scrabble, haven't you? Virtually everything I mention you've never heard of, but you know Scrabble.
Yes, I love Scrabble.
You put all of the symptoms and experiences on Scrabble tiles. Put them face down in the box. Give them a little shake, and then pick 7 out. And this is what I'm dealing with in life right now. And some of them might be opposing traits. Some of them might be traits that reinforce and amplify each other. Some of them might be things I didn't even know were part of this, but hey, now they are.
Yeah.
If we lose the labels, which cut us off from understanding, and just go, we know all of this stuff, and it can cross pollen. Oh, that looks pretty cool. I was going to say, if you want a literal toolbox to save your marriage, you're welcome to set up a literal toolbox and put stickers on it as you go, if that's what gets it done. But if you got a communication problem about emotional reciprocity, doesn't matter if you're autistic or ADHD. Learn about emotional reciprocity, that thing in neurodiverse relationships, because the wisdom is out there. If I think I'm autistic, the book on how to communicate with your partner if you have ADHD is still going to be super useful to me. If I'm ADHD and going out makes my skin all tingly and the lights are too bright, read me a book about autism and I'm going to pick up some solutions. But I think what really I'm impressed with, Mona, you were talking about that curious why, instead of being like, why the hell are you doing that? It can be like, why the hell are you doing that? Because you can learn so much, like turning it from they're giving me a hard time to maybe they're having a hard time. And what Greg often tells us about dropping the notion that there's a right way to be and I'm being it. Why aren't you? Both people can drop that. If we can drop that and go, I don't need my assumptions to be fulfilled here, but what's going on?
Every relationship that I am in with a neurodivergent partner makes me a better person. Okay. And I'll tell you one of the things that I continue to use. When I am triggered by my partner, I look inside first and I say, what does this resemble? Because I was raised by an autistic father who didn't know he was autistic. I also think now he was ADHD. So, I'm picking partners who may feel comfortable because that's what I grew up with. And I'm getting triggered and the trigger happened in my childhood, I haven't maybe healed that part or acknowledged that part fully. And by acknowledging it and working on healing it, I see things differently in my romantic relationship. So that's really important. And I say, and I said this on the podcast before, and you guys took it differently. If it's hysterical,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
historical.
Yeah.
And what I mean is just what I said. If you're upset about it and really triggered, it's probably something from your past, right? And that can be so helpful. Instead of getting angry at my partner, judging them for something that is maybe part of their neurology, but isn't part of mine, I pause, think about what it is I need to understand and learn about myself, which could be something from the past, and then I get curious. And then my partner may say to me, I feel this way, or I act this way, or I do this because of something from my past. But if I'm just reacting and getting angry and judgmental because it's not how my neurology works, then I don't give my partner space to share with me what is historical for them that has become part of their identity that they may want to work on changing or may never change. So it's just something that at 61, it's helped me, and I don't know if it'll help other folks out there, but just something to think about. We're so quick to judge our partners. And I was in my 30-year marriage, I was the biggest judger and, emotional outbursts, angry screamer, whatever. But it helps calm my nervous system by changing the way I look at my partner's differences, you know? So I'd love to hear your thoughts if you have any.
Yeah, I think you're doing great parts work, Mona, basically. I would
Thank you.
say.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of what you're doing there. And I would highly recommend internal family systems as a modality for neurodivergence and emotional regulation, by the way, because what you're doing there is instead of being over-identified and just reacting out of this place, you are slowing down with curiosity and care to your history, to what might be going on, and you're creating space around that. And what that does, right? And again, judgment is sort of the oil and water to higher self, you might think. And so when we come at things with judgment, even toward ourselves, that creates resistance. That creates internal tension, that creates anxiety, that creates reactivity, that creates stronger reactions in us. So you're doing good with that work, I would say. And it also helps you also see the parts that are in play in your partner too. So when you ask, oh, and they may have something in their history that's also cueing this response and this reaction, you're not letting your judgment put an over-identification on their behavior too, right? You're saying, oh, there's a context here I can be open to, I can be curious about. And again, that creates safety to be able to meet each other in those places and to work through it together and to support each other in the ways we want. So going back to an earlier thing you said, Mona, which is this Jekyll and Hyde thing, which I want to touch on, because if you're AuDHD in a woman, you're likely to have been first diagnosed with borderline and with bipolar, which bipolar, okay, it's a thing. It's, but it's also a spectrum. We all move in and out of emotion and different levels of energy to the different degrees. And of course, BPD, I don't believe in personality disorders. I'm sorry, all the clinicians, psychiatrists, diagnosticians out there. You can't be born into this world as a disorder. Your personality cannot be a disorder. This is a form of neurodivergence, okay? And if you look at borderline traits, you're going to see issues with identity, reactivity in relationships. You're going to see overfunction responses, high masking. You're going to see hot, cold in relationships. Guess what that is? That's ADHD and autism together, probably with relational trauma. And so this is the other thing I would say is that particularly if you're a woman and you've been diagnosed or identify as a woman and have been diagnosed with ADHD, take a look at the possibility that you may be a really high masker and that you also may have a lot of autistic traits going on. And again, those things will lead to a lot of internal conflict of who do I need to be in the world? Again, going back to social conditioning and identity issues. And that's going to create a lot of internal conflict and resistance and non-acceptance for yourselves, which also will likely lead, and here's some other things to think about. Here's some other clues. Physical health manifestations, somatic manifestations. Women, my AuDHD women, all have chronic pain. They have joint issues. A lot of times they have PCOS, PMDD, EDS, Ehlers-Danlos, fibromyalgia, these types of things, because when you're in resistance and you're carrying that much tension and you're trying that hard, particularly as a woman, and guys I think have it a little easier because we can be more independent whenever ways we want to. Women get really socialized strongly and also really sensitive to that. Guys are like, we're our own island, F you. We'll do what I want. I think that's a little easier. But all of that manifests into inflammation and also reactions in our internal bodily symptoms, in our endocrine system, in our immune system, and we're likely to have issues that manifest like that. So the body and the mind are one thing. And I think the social components here are also, I think you described really well, Mona, which is also what I see in my AuDHD clients, which is a lot of times a want and a need for connection and a want and a need to recover from social interaction or to isolate, to stabilize yourself. And it's just like this back and forth and working through all that masking, working through who I'm supposed to be, and trying so hard in social situations too, a lot of times are going to just amplify a lot of these issues, and amplify a lot of that internal conflict. I want to go out, but I don't want to go out. What is this going to lead to? People don't get me. Who do I need to be? That's a nightmare, right? So I think that's one way I sort of see the AuDHD lens for women. For men, I would say that, again, we're going to be seeing some masking, but maybe not as much. And you're also going to see, I think, more externalized presentations of anger. I think women who are AuDHD tend to be overfunctioners. And again, stereotype here, if you've got trauma too, meaning they're trying hard all the time. They're making sure that everything goes well. They have a lot of anxiety. I think AuDHD in men tends to look a little bit more at times like angry reactions and shutdowns. And also they tend to get pinned as being more lazy or procrastinators, where women tend to be those overfunctioners. What do I need to attend to? Who do I need to be? Right? Guys are like, I'm not doing that, And again, those are big stereotypes here, but I think those are some of the contrasts. I think I see a bit with gender roles.
Greg, I again agree with everything you say, not out of policy, just because you're right. I get sad when I look back at my mother, who was diagnosed as bipolar in the 80s, when, there wasn't a chance that anybody could have thought she was autistic, and ADHD was
Exactly.
not.
Yep.
And she went through the whole, drug roulette, every kind of modern and ancient pharmaceutical they could do. They gave her the electroconvulsive therapy multiple times,
Yep.
rebooted her brain a few times there. There's years she can't remember. And plus, just like, God, it had to have been hard. No one understanding her. No one. Nobody understood her.
Right.
And I can see so much of me in her, but
Mhm.
because I understand it, I can manage it. That I don't have to, bite somebody's head off because I need to step out of the car because I'm overwhelmed. But she did. because there was no reference to say this. You're not making this up.
Right.
That your moods are not a psychiatric disorder. They are an extreme but predictable response to what is going on around you.
Hmm.
So I'm glad that the three of us have survived this long with some of the challenges we've had. So let's keep it rolling forward. Uh, future generations don't have to choose between one diagnosis or an identity between the two. I think things are gonna be okay.
Once we figure out it's sort of an AuDHD thing in particular, we're often sifting through the traits, where they are, how they show up, and how to work with them, And man, it again, like I said, once people are able to be like, oh, like you said, oh, this is my autistic trait, and I have a woman I work with, right? And she's definitely an overfunctioner, high anxiety. She's got a lot of this physical and symptoms and all this stuff. And she will say, you know, my, my ADHD parts, will be like, we're going with the flow. Okay, it didn't work out. That's great. And then she's like, the autistic parts are like, no, we're not going with the flow. And I'm like, hey, so that is wonderful. Now, I would kind of prefer you to side with your ADHD parts, but you can't side with them. They're both equal, just like you don't play favorites with your own children, right? So in that moment, you've got to take care of that autistic part because you are free forming it right now, and your ADHD parts are dragging it on the floor, So that's a time to pause and say, hey, autistic parts, we're going to need you here, here, and here. And I hear you. I understand you. I feel for you. I'm listening to you. I welcome you. You can keep warning me when you're feeling dysregulated around this. And then guess what happens, right? That part's like softens a little bit, maybe steps back a little bit, and then you're off again into your ADHD parts, which are just into a process-oriented thing, And so that's the kind of thing that I'm often working with these clients. And of course, we need to be able to do that with ourselves, but having our partners do that or understand that, it's a whole nother level,
Well,
right? So this requires a lot of personal and individual work, and awareness, and it's not easy.
I can't imagine my partner going, "You're arguing with the voices in your head again." I'm like, no, you don't understand. I'm not arguing with them. I'm
Right.
hearing them out.
Yeah.
I'm
Love
giving
that.
them a space to tell me what they need to say because they're all right. If I listen, they're fine. It's when I
Yes,
ignore them that they cause problems.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
that's where the nervous system dysregulation starts, I
Yeah.
think. And it can create such havoc in a relationship. And, it really takes some major, I think, internal individual work to be able to see your partner is struggling and to say, and Greg, you've said this many times, I see you struggling. I'm here for you if you need me. And then kind of step away because those of us that are friggin' codependent, I can't imagine how challenging it is to be with an AuDHD partner and you're trying to solve all their dilemmas,
Yeah.
as one tries to take over for the other and there's constant conflict. It's not your job as the partner to resolve these challenges, but it is your job to be loving and supportive. And, we're not talking about abuse here. We're not talking about anything related to abuse. You should never, ever, ever accept abuse in any situation. Any type of neurodivergence is not an excuse for abuse. But, your partner is an adult and they have a right to go through their process. And I think, and this is something that I hear often where the neurodivergent partner might get upset when their non-autistic or non-ADHD partners asking questions. I would ask those partners who are being asked questions in a very hopefully kind way to take time and pause and answer those questions at some point. Because when we don't understand our partners and we are seeking to help change the situation that's causing them a ton of dysregulation, we get dysregulated and it turns often into a major conflict. And then oftentimes there's not repair. And so it's a pattern, and it keeps going around and around. So that's kind of my last thought on this. And I hope that folks who are AuDHD or wondering if they're AuDHD will take time either to work with a professional who understands this, like Greg, or go on their own journey and learn and learn and learn so that they can be the best partner possible. Because if you use any part of your neurology, and I may get pushback on this, as an excuse to treat your partner badly, it's not okay. It's just not okay. Learn what you need to learn about your identity and what works best for you. Share it with your partner. Talk about how you can both get your needs met in the best way possible. And you're not going to get all your needs met by, your single partner from one person. But your partner needs to understand what you need in different situations. You need to understand what they need. And it's going to change. It's going to change, right? It's going to change based on what's going on at work, with your family, and what have you. But I think there's opportunities for both partners to learn and grow. And, you got to want to do the work, though.
Always learning, always growing. Hey, Mona, where can we find you online?
Neurodiverselove.com, and there you'll find my podcast and all my resources. And I'm working on the Neurodiverse Love documentary, which Greg is one of the coach therapists who I interviewed for that. And hopefully it's going to be coming out at the end of the year. And you can see the trailer on my website.
Oh, cool.
Neurodiverselove.com.
Oh, hot diggity.
Yeah.
All right. Follow the link on your screen. It's not a link. You can't click it, but type it in. Type it in. Greg, how about you? I tell people about you on places like Reddit when they're asking, are there any men in the U.S. who do this? Where do we find you?
I have a website that I don't update very much, but you can easily contact me through it, and it'll give you some ways of contacting me, gregfuqua.com. And then, of course, I'm on Psychology Today, another way to search me out and find me. And my contact information is out there and available, and happy to hear from anybody who is struggling or on the neurodivergent spectrum somewhere. I would love to be part of helping you figure it out too. Not that I don't have enough work. Let me tell you that much.
Well, I hope people find you and you get some more great people to work with. Hey, you can find me online, but I'm just starting to realize maybe I took all my parts and gave them all different accounts, because I'm kind of spread all across the internet. If you search for Big Ass Superstar, eventually you'll find me. Hey, please, if you've stayed with us this long into the program, do us a solid. Would you hit the thumbs up thing, hit the subscribe, hit the bell, sign the little thing, get on a list. We'd be happy to have you again next time on Neurodivergent Connections.